but I'd like to ask you, if you have a cell phone, please put your cell phone on vibrate or silent. We're going to do that.
Or off.
This first forum is about SOAR and Sustained VC. Afterwards, we're going to have a 10-minute break, and then we'll have the City Council candidates at 7:45. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening. I'm David Marin with the League of Women Voters. Welcome to our forum on the land use issues in Ventura County, and this is a presentation by SOAR, Sustained VC, and representing a no position, our third panelist. At this time, I'd like to introduce the co-president of the League of Women Voters, Pat Essick.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming this evening. We're really happy that you're here. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the League of Women Voters. It's an organization that was founded as women got the right to vote when the amendment was passed that gave women the right to vote. It was founded because the women had never had the opportunity to participate in government, and they needed to learn how. And the organization has been founded to encourage active participation in government and to help people become educated and able to be involved in government. And the kinds of things we're doing tonight are exactly the kinds of things that the League believes in. Being educated so that when you have a chance to vote, you can make a wise decision. We're very happy to see you all here. We're very happy to partner with the Ventura County Civic Alliance. And I'm happy to have these panelists that have agreed to come tonight and to educate us about their points of view. And I wish you well. Thank you. Forgot my most important duty. Would you all please stand for the flag salute? Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I think I failed to mention it, but the League of Women Voters does not support or oppose candidates, and it also does not support or oppose parties. So I just wanted to let you know about that.
Thank you, Pat. Our other co-host tonight is the Ventura County Civic Alliance. This is a nonprofit regional group that's focused on sustaining the quality of life in Ventura County. They produce the State of the Region report. There are some copies out there in the back as well for those who want to take a copy of that. At this time, I'd like to explain the format. So the candidates, because this is a very complicated issue in some way, we're giving them 5 minutes, and I said candidates, I'll make that mistake all night, I'm sure. But our panelists, we drew numbers earlier. Our first panelist will be Steve Bennett, representing SOAR. They'll have 5 minutes for the opening statements. After that, we'll be taking the questions from the audience. They'll have up to 1.5 minutes for those questions. If you saw that we handed out cards when you came in, you can just raise your hand. Our volunteers will pick up the cards. They'll come up here, we'll sort them, and then I'll ask as many as I can tonight. We'll try to have each panelist answer the questions. Now, we offered all sides the choice of 2 panelists, so Sustained VC has 2 panelists, but they split the time that would be allotted, so just so there's no confusion on that. With that, Roger, I'll ask you to go ahead and hit the blank on the other remote. We'll bring up the PowerPoint. A little harder, maybe. At the egg. Very technical stuff going on here. I don't want to, there we go. And Steve, I think you want to back up a slide. And with that, you have 5 minutes. We'll go ahead and begin with our first panelist, Steve Bennett.
Well, good evening. I want to thank David Marin, the League, Pat, for hosting another debate that's really been valuable for our community. You know, I've been speaking a lot about SOAR, and I ask this question oftentimes. I say, where can you find a place in Southern California where local officials, local elected officials, have stood up to the development pressure, have protected the farmland in their community, and stopped urban sprawl? And it simply doesn't exist in Southern California. And The reason for that is because the profits from urban sprawl are just too enormous, and the campaign contributions to local officials are just too generous. And that's why 20 years ago, the citizens of Ventura County decided that they were going to take that power away from local elected officials to have the final say on whether land should be rezoned for development or not. And 20 years later, I think we can say SOAR works, and it's worked well in Southern California. And having the right to vote on development has become a core value of the citizens of Ventura County. And it's so embedded as a core value that when the opponents of SOAR, many of the people that are supporting Measure F also opposed SOAR when we did it 20 years ago, when they did their poll last February, they found that they just simply couldn't beat SOAR in a straight yes or no vote. And so their strategy was to come up with a competing initiative and try to confuse the voters, weaken SOAR's protection, but not make it obvious to the voters that they were weakening SOAR's protection. And so what we end up with here is Measure F that has many loopholes in it. When I say loopholes, I mean opportunities where the Board of Supervisors, without a vote of the people, can rezone land for development. And those loopholes, when you look at them on the surface, look like, well, they may seem to be okay. But what you don't realize is that those loopholes have attracted big money to the Measure F campaign. A disproportionate amount of money from the people that have land inside those loopholes is flowing in. And when we wrote our ballot comments back last August, they were then released. Everybody could see them. And after we started pointing out these loopholes, you started to see the Measure F campaign become pretty desperate to try to hide the fact that these loopholes are there in Measure F. I have here a Measure F brochure that has been sent out. And I have up on the screen, I just took a couple of the pages out of this brochure. I'd just like to call your attention to the two bullet points that I circled, bullet point 4 and bullet point 6 there. And we have magnified those so that you can read bullet point 4. This is bullet point 4. Improve safety at urban public schools by permitting options for adjacent farmland to avoid conflicts while keeping the land in compatible county uses. Urban development such as housing tracts and retail centers would need a public vote. And I would offer to you that last sentence there is flat out false. It is not true. And it is printed right there in their brochure. We've made that clear over and over, and they continue to repeat that. This is bullet point 6 that we had circled. No urban development can occur under Measure F without a vote of the people, period. Sounds very clear, sounds very definitive, and it is equally not true. It's a false statement. Now, I would offer to you, I want to prove to you that it's a false statement, both of those. This is the actual language from one of Measure F's loopholes, and this is Section 2(7)I. And it says the Board of Supervisors, without a vote of the people, may redesignate agricultural designated parcels adjacent to existing primary or secondary public school sites. I want to point out that word site, that's going to come up later, that are also adjacent to a city sphere, an existing city urban growth boundary, city limit lines, to an alternate general plan land use designation to reduce conflicts between schools and agricultural uses. Now that is a standalone section. It doesn't refer to being limited by any other section of Measure F, and there is no limitation in there on what the Board of Supervisors, if you look at the last sentences there, what the Board of Supervisors can designate the land to, nor any limits on how large the land area that they could decide to use this loophole for. So Section 2(7)I has no limits on what can be approved, even though they say that urban development can't be approved next to a school. Section 2.7.
I have to stop you there, Steve.
Oh,
Okay.
Thank
Timer's
you.
right there, but yes, that was 5 minutes.
Great.
So we're going to move on. And one thing I didn't mention, at the league forums, we do not allow applause or anything, so I appreciate that you held your applause. We'll give you a chance later on in the evening. I'll ask Suzanne to go ahead and close up this one and open up the other PowerPoint.
I need the, can I?
Go ahead and press escape. And then you can close this one completely. and open up Sustain VC. Anybody who has questions for tech support, I'm your man. Go ahead and press F5, Suzanne. And Steve, if you could pass the clicker, or looks like we took care of that. Okay, we are reset. And Suzanne, I think we're all set. Thank you. So how about a big hand for Suzanne? Suzanne, right down here. There's that gate. Okay, our next panelists are Rob Roy and Lynn Jensen from the Sustain VC group. You two have the 5 minutes. You can see the timer in front of you, and you have the clicker. So we'll go ahead and start.
Thank you. My name is Lynn Jensen, and I'm the Executive Director of Ventura County CoLab. We are a policy consultant to farmers who wrote Measure F. Measure F starts from a simple idea. If you want to stop sprawl and protect agricultural land and open space in Ventura County, then agriculture must be economically viable. Our measure was filed by 3 farmers, John Lamb, Patty Waters, and Phil McGrath. They're local farmers in Ventura County, and they are family farmers. Their families have farmed in Ventura County for a combined 400 years. Agriculture is facing unprecedented challenges. You know about the 5 years of drought, pest control, lack of adequate buffers, severe lack of labor, bureaucratic red tape, and international competition, and Rob is going to talk about those and the impacts of those to farmers. What we know, though, as in the Star reported, that there are 3 growers that have called it quits just in the last few months in the Oxnard Plain. And this is very devastating. Over 1,000 employees were laid off. So why did farmers write Measure F? Well, this is the reason. The first reason was to keep farms from becoming unfarmable, and that's what's happening here in Ventura County. You see the picture there. That's what happened in the Central Valley when farmland was fallowed. To maintain the public vote for urban development outside of curbs, we agree that this is a core value in Ventura County, and so we kept that public vote regardless of what the SOAR politicians are going to tell you. We add goals and policies to the county general plan that supports farming. This is one of the key parts of our measure, and hopefully we'll get to talk about that more. We improve the safety of 5 public schools. There are 4 in Oxnard and 1 school site in Ventura. We allow some limited food processing, adding jobs and stimulating the economy, and we're very excited about that. And we also require an economic study to guide the renewal in 20 years, because 2050 is simply too long. Most importantly are these goals and policies with respect to water for farmers. Without strong water policies like those that are already exist in other coastal counties, agricultural counties that are close to us, Ventura County ag land will become fallow and barren. And farmers are tired of SOAR politicians demonizing them on Facebook and letters and videos, calling them large landowners and developers. Farmers have to farm on large land. That's just the way it is. But they are stewards of over 300,000 acres of local farmland, and they just want to keep farming. But what's happening is that the exemptions in SOAR will allow for development. But the question is, who decides, the voters or politicians? There was a recent story in the Ventura County Star, SOAR contributor tied to development proposal. This is the development proposal. A single major donor gave SOAR $150,000 over time, and actually $110,000 just in the last few months, or the last few years, excuse me. The City of Fillmore records show that this donor's 300-acre parcel, which is shown on this map, of pristine open space is inside the curb line of the City of Fillmore, and it's exempt from a public vote. Justification for this plan was a 33-lot gated community of McMansions on the hillside, and it was called Rancho Los Olivos. This is what we call crony politics. Our farmers simply want to keep farming, and Measure F is the solution, and I'm going to turn it over right now to Rob Roy, who is going to talk about farmers.
In all 1 minute and 22 seconds, I'm Rob Roy, President General Counsel, Ventura County Ag Association. Came here in 1977, and I've been an ag labor attorney for almost 40 years, representing the interests of all the farmers in this county. I'm talking about production farmers, packing houses, labor contractors, truck drivers, et cetera. Just to sort of get through all of this, the bottom line is we have 3 choices here tonight. We have the extreme view of no protection of our agricultural farms at all on a no vote. On the other hand, we have the very extreme position of locking up our agricultural property in a ballot box. And then we have the middle approach, which is taking some of the best of the SOAR initiative, allowing the citizens to vote on some of these projects, and also, most importantly, keeping the viability of the local farming industry. That's really key, and I hope to answer a lot of questions tonight about how important it is for farmers to remain in farming and provide all these folks in the audience the free viewscape they have and the quality of lifestyle that many people in this room think is attributed to SOAR. Thank you.
Thank you. And Roger, I'll ask you to go ahead and do the blank on the other switch. Our next panelist, there's really three choices for voters. You can vote yes on F, yes on C, or you may choose to vote no on both of them. And representing that position of no on both is Jared Barton. 5 minutes.
And I apologize for
1 second, Jared. Okay, you ready? Here we go, 5 minutes.
And I apologize for my complete lack of slides. California's home prices and rents are higher than just about anywhere else. Building less housing than people demand drives high housing costs. Local policies acting as barriers to housing supply include land use restrictions that make developable land much more costly than it is inherently. Such restrictions are supply constraints. Basic economic theory predicts, and many empirical studies confirm, that housing markets in which supply cannot keep up with demand will see housing prices rise. Restricted supply leads to higher prices and less affordability. Local barriers to housing development allow a small number of individuals to capture the economic benefits of living in a community, thus limiting its diversity and mobility. The trade-offs inherent in land use regulation are well known and have been of concern to policymakers and academics for decades. Though the exact number of new housing units California needs to build is uncertain, the general magnitude is enormous. On top of the 100 to 140,000 housing units California is expected to build each year, the state probably would have to build as many as 100,000 additional units annually, almost exclusively in coastal communities like ours, to seriously mitigate its problems with housing affordability. Good evening. My name is Jared Barton, and I'm an assistant professor of economics at CSU Channel Islands in the Martin V. Smith School of Business and Economics. And I'd like to clarify something. That isn't the position of my employer, my department chair, or my wife, who would prefer that I was not here this evening. The reason I'm here by myself is no one else would sit with me. However, every word I just read to you is the consensus expert economic opinion in the United States of America, because they're not my words. I quoted those respectively from the California Legislative Analyst Office report in September 2015, from Jason Furman, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors to this guy you might have heard of, Barack Hussein Obama, and from a White House report that came out yesterday on how to build affordable housing. Let me make this perfectly clear. The economic consensus on land use restrictions is that land use restrictions serve to reduce economic mobility and reduce housing affordability. Now, I know, because I have read the VC Star this weekend, for the last 25 years of issues that have talked about SOAR, that you have been warned about this repeatedly in reports, and repeatedly someone from SOAR has told you that that is not true. And I am here to tell you that they are wrong. It is true. And in fact, an economist who is way better than me has demonstrated that in his PhD dissertation, and not for any county, not for General County, for our county right here. I know that what I am saying is grossly unpopular, and I don't care, because it happens to be true. And the job of politicians is to find what's popular and make it law. But the job of economists is to find what's right and make it popular. So I'm here to tell you what you are doing is choking off housing affordability. You're choking off economic development. You're making life harder on farmers who are no longer economically viable, or who would be a little bit more economically viable if they could just slough off a little bit of land here and there. That's what you're doing. So it's okay. I know what's going to happen. I too can read a poll. I used to work in Washington, D.C. But I want to make it perfectly clear that when you go home, when you look yourself in the mirror, what you are doing is to make it harder for poor people in your community and people who would be your neighbors if only you would vote otherwise, to live in Ventura County, the most beautiful place on earth. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and give them all a round of applause. Burn off some energy. Meanwhile, I'm showing off my technical skills here. Okay, we now, Roger, you're all set. Very good. We're going to start on the questions. Lynn, Rob, we'll start with you at Sustain VC. Besides allowing voters to decide on zoning changes in open space and agriculture, what else do these measures do? What else does your measure do? You have 1 minute, 30
I think
seconds.
from our perspective, from the farming community perspective, we have a number of provisions in the bill that would encourage the viability of farming, which is one of the biggest issues that I'm dealing with right now. I am dealing every day with lack of water, lack of available labor, pesticide elimination. We have regulations that are beyond the pale from both the federal and state government. It's virtually almost impossible for us to deal with these issues day to day. And so an initiative that would recognize the viability of the farming industry, I think, is the underlying premise of SOAR. If you believe that SOAR is really all about saving open space in agriculture, which I don't think it ever was, it's a slow growth measure. But even assuming arguendo that it was, then the underlying premise is that you have to have a viable agricultural community that is going to continue keeping these beautiful lands in agriculture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to point out the most important goal that's in our initiative is about water. Without water, you will not see this farmland be irrigated, and you will not see production agriculture in this county. And when we worked with the SOAR organization on this in the beginning, they really refused to put that particular piece of it, which was talking about infrastructure, water infrastructure for agriculture, into their measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Jared, do you want to try and talk about anything in the measures that maybe voters don't realize?
No, I think that Steve has done a good job highlighting pieces, even though I'm not sure he's correct on them. He has highlighted the pieces that I think people might find most objectionable.
All right, and Steve, we'll go to you. I'll read the question again. Besides allowing voters to decide on zoning changes in open space and agriculture, what else does your measure do?
Well, when you say my measure, I think we have to say that in contrast with Measure F. Certainly, SOAR's Measure C ensures and continues people's right to vote before any major open space and ag land conversion takes place. And that simply is not what happens with Measure F. And Measure F has what I was referring to there as those loopholes in there. And those loopholes are vaguely written enough that with all of the profits that will come from urban development, you'll have high-priced lawyers that will find lots of ways to stretch those loopholes. Now, that's something that is the core fundamental difference between Measure C and Measure F. Every time that we found a good reason to be able to say, hey, we need to have an exception here for the Board of Supervisors to be able to rezone land, we carefully structured that so that there were limits so that it couldn't be abused. In every instance where Measure F created those kinds of loopholes, they did just the opposite. They did not put limits in, just as you saw with their 2 bullet points in the school loophole. They didn't limit what it could be rezoned to. They didn't limit how large it could be. And that is the fundamental difference, is you're certain about your right to vote, and you're not with Measure F.
Thank you. Jared, we'll start with you on the next question. For all of the panelists, there's quite a few here regarding the loss of farmland. Jared, there's been 3 major farming operations have closed in the last few months. What factors contributed to these closures? And if, in your opinion, if SOAR is supposed to save farmland, why are we losing so much of it?
So first, I apologize. I'm an economist, but I do not carefully review the businesses that open and close in the county, and so I won't speculate as to what happened with them. But the fundamental changes that we are facing here is that this land has lots of economic uses, and its highest valued use is probably not agriculture. And the reason that you know that is that you all had to pass a law to keep it in agriculture. If that law weren't there, I think that we are all acutely aware that tomorrow it would be turned into other things. That is evidence that that is not the most economically viable use of that land. Now, I have no doubt there are some farmers who are still making money hand over fist, and more power to you. I simply believe that people who are currently holders of real estate, and it is no longer the highest valued use of that real estate, should be able to sell it to other people or use it themselves in ways that are more profitable. Period. End of story. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, the same question to you about SOAR. There's been 3 major farming operations that have closed in the last few months. What factor contributed to these closures? And if SOAR saves farmland, why are we losing so much of it?
Agriculture constantly has, over decades, over the last couple centuries in the United States, you're always going to see change in agriculture. There is a concerted effort to try to make it look like agriculture is in this unique stressed situation. And yet the same thing was alleged about SOAR when SOAR passed 20 years ago, that SOAR was going to ruin agriculture. And yet, if you look at all of the statistics put out by the Agricultural Commissioner, the Farm Bureau, et cetera, agriculture's production is at record levels 20 years after SOAR passed. Agriculture land values are at record levels. But there is a concerted effort, just like there is a concerted effort to mislead you about the loopholes in Measure F, there is a concerted effort to try to trump this up. In fact, in the Pacific Coast Business Times, they talk about that large farm that closed. They actually write in there that it was because the man was retiring, and another ag operation took over that farmland right after that. Those workers are out there working in other operations. You're not seeing all of that happening when you have record crop production and record land values. But that's not what Measure F wants to emphasize. They want to emphasize that they really don't have any loopholes in Measure F, and agriculture is really in trouble.
Thank you. We'll stop you there. And to the Sustain VC group, so same question to you. Do you want me to reread it?
No, I understand the question. If you believe that, you can buy a lot of desert land, folks, because they've been spewing that for years. Obviously, Mr. Bennett hasn't worked in the private sector. He doesn't know the difference between gross sales and your net within a company. For years and years, all we've heard from the SOAR people is scare tactics, how wonderful they have created this county, and the reality is it's all about the growers. Why did these growers go out of business? They were all 3 of my clients, folks. I have personal knowledge of what happened to these particular people. And I will tell you that the Hiji people that had union contracts for over 40 years in this county, with workers being paid $31 an hour average for piece rate production, went out of business for one primary reason, because it wasn't economical anymore in this state. And we don't get any help from the SOAR folks. They haven't contributed in any way. And in fact, this SOAR initiative in 1998 was nothing more than the bootstrap for them to get to elected positions. Linda Park sitting there, Mr. Bennett have 20-year careers and retirement funds and have living here, and they're the ones who make all these decisions. They're the ones that make these decisions as to whether or not farmers get the water, or the farmers get the pesticide issues, or they get land use designations. So let's not miss the forest for the trees, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett, we'll start with you, and this one talks about the timeline. So with the timeline spanning 2 generations, what specific tools and support mechanisms does Measure C provide to sustain the long-term viability of Ventura County agriculture? And along those lines, similar question as far as why the 34-year timeline in Measure C?
Great, I appreciate the question. Many people raise this issue, and you hear this mantra all the time. It says, hey, things are going to change between now and 2050. How could you possibly lock an initiative in between now and 2050? What SOAR does is it locks in the concept that when we make changes in Ventura County, we're going to follow the core value that we have here in Ventura County, which is we're going to check with the people before we make any major changes to open space and ag land in Ventura County. That's all it really does. So I would offer to you, that's the length of time question. In Napa County, when their SOAR initiative expired, their farmers up in Napa County supported and pushed through a 50-year extension of their SOAR initiative, and in 2008 it passed with over 60% of the vote. So you're not locking in Ventura County, you're locking in people's right to vote. But the second half of the question is, what are we doing for farming? I would offer to you that the same argument was made 20 years ago, and we responded and said the number one threat to any farm is if the farm next to it develops, because that's the real problem for farming, is they get surrounded by that urban development. And what SOAR does is ensure you don't have that piecemeal development. What Measure F does with its loopholes, it allows that piecemeal development, and that's the risk to farming.
To sustain VC people?
I'm very happy to answer that question. I've been waiting for it for a long time. Mr. Bennett seems to think that there's an analogous situation between Napa Valley and Ventura County. Anybody here ever been to Napa County? The entire ag production area up there is grape vineyards. All the workers, all the companies, all the businesses, all the processing facilities, all the tourism is predicated upon preserving the agricultural nature of that community. They stole that initiative, brought it down here, put Ventura County on it after it had gone through the Supreme Court, and called it their own. The problem is that Ventura County has ag-urban interface problems that you don't have in Napa County, okay? And they've been fighting that for years. And the farmers keep dealing with this all the time. We deal with people all the time that don't understand late-night activities and irrigation and pesticides and lighting at nighttime and noises. It's a constant struggle with these folks. And that's only the production side. That's not the international competition and the lack of water and lack of pesticides and everything else. Making an analogy between Napa Valley and Ventura County for purposes of SOAR and saying that 60% of the people up there supported it until 2050, yeah, of course.
Thank you. Jared, would you like to weigh in about the issue of timeline and sustaining agricultural viability?
Sure, it's related. I understand what Steve is saying there about the vote. I get that. But you all have an opportunity. You could preserve this for 100 years. You could preserve it for 1,000 years if you want. You could buy an easement on all the farmland. And in fact, you had the opportunity to do that in 2004. You had a vote about starting an actual organization that would charge a 1/4 cent tax on transactions and take that money and actually buy easements. And you could do that. You could do things like tradable development permits, where you let them develop some chunk of land somewhere for buying 5 times as much land somewhere else in the county. You didn't do that either. In other words, what you really like is you like voting to make other people continue to keep land the way you want without personally having to pay for it. And I'm sorry, when my kid takes other people's stuff without permission, I punish him. I'm sorry I can't do the same to you, but, you know, I'm not your dad. So that's what I think of it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to start with Sustain VC on this next question. Let's talk about water. I've heard a proponent of Sustain VC, Measure F, say it would help save water, especially important now because of the drought. Of course, this person goes on to say they see fields being watered with overspray into the road. It's done in the middle of the day. And these other questions, to get to the heart of the question to you, is how does Measure F truly save water? What would be the role for the Board of Supervisors?
Thank you. I'm going to take this one. I think it's really important if the Board of Supervisors and the county and the people who live here really want to have agriculture here, even in 20 years, they need to understand that we have to have water for farmers. And so our Measure F has really a goal for water and a policy for water. One of them is to try to get the county together to work on water infrastructure. There's many projects out there, they're very important, and we want that present in our general plan. And the second part is to maintain water resources for agriculture. And that is just a key goal, that if this county and the Board of Supervisors doesn't have in their general plan, then there's really no policy direction for this board from that perspective. And that is the most important part, really, of the Measure F, of the Measure F ballot measure. And we care very much about farming, and the only way we're going to keep it here is through really good policies. Now, it starts at the general plan level, that's where we're putting it in, but it needs to trickle down into the zoning ordinances and all the other planning documents in the county to make sure that we do have water infrastructure projects that use recycled water, that use brackish water kinds of facilities as well in this county to promote farming for the next 20 years. And if it doesn't happen at the Board of Supervisors level, then you're going to see more land be fallowed, just like the Central Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. Jared, same question to you about water, but I'll allow you to add to that if you want to speak about government subsidies for water to local farmers. So the original question was about how would Measure F help save water, and the role of the Board of Supervisors. You could add that from the...
You know, I'm quite all right. I'll go ahead and let Steve talk about that. Thank you.
Always love it when a panelist gives me more time. So, Steve, we'll go to you with the same question about sustained VCs supposed to save water. What would be the role of SOAR with water, and what's your view on the Measure F?
I think the steady theme here, and this is another classic example, Measure F doesn't give any authority to the Board of Supervisors on the issue of water that Measure C does not give. But it is one of those soundbite issues that really sounds good and is being put out there. And this is part of what I would call a campaign of misinformation, literally trying to deceive people about the differences between Measure F and Measure C. Again, I want to emphasize, I've talked to attorney after attorney. There's not anything the Board of Supervisors can do under Measure F that they won't be able to do under Measure C. But what we will have with Measure C is we will have a commitment that if there is something that is really important that causes major rezoning of open space and ag, the citizens will be involved in that. You know, Rob has just mentioned that I don't have a lot of private sector experience, but I'll tell you one thing I do know. I know the difference between an honest campaign and people that fight fair and people that don't. And when you listen to the allegations when Rob says we stole it from Napa County, when you listen to those kinds of things, you are really seeing the beginnings of that campaign that's going to be very intense here for the next 6 weeks. Thank you.
Actually, David?
Sorry, Jared, you gave up your time.
Very good.
All right, but I will let you start with the next question, and you could use some of that time if you wanted.
Thank you.
So the question is, and this will be for all panelists, it's about housing, because obviously we're protecting agriculture. The question is about housing. So how many houses would we need to be, or would need to be built in Ventura County to significantly bring down the cost of housing? And given Prop 13, doesn't it make it hard to build middle-class housing that actually doesn't cost the government more in services than it brings in with taxes?
So this is actually a really good question, and it's really hard to do for a separate issue, which has nothing to do with SOAR. So this is not SOAR's fault, but in addition to the popularity of SOAR, we also have the popularity of single-family homes. It's probably the most popular zoning thing for most voters. Fundamentally, you have to change that too. You have to allow developers, when they recognize that it is profitable, which is to say that there are a bunch of humans that would like to join you here, to develop something other than single-family housing, which no one is particularly fond of once they're already here. It's kind of a miracle like that. I don't really know what it could possibly have to do with. I want to back up for a second. I apologize, and Steve, this wasn't directed to you in any way, but it came into my head while you were talking. Water is a separate issue from land, even though they are tied up. If you really wanted to deal with water availability in both California and in Ventura County, you would price water in markets, which is to say it would get more expensive when it's more scarce. And that's deeply unpopular. And really, I'm on a roll tonight for deeply unpopular. So let me put in a plug for pricing markets. I'm sorry, I won't price markets with water. We'll price water with markets. Fundamentally, and the housing affordability, the Legislative Analyst Office report actually talks about this, and the graph is tiny. So if you're interested, I will show you at the end, but it's hard to read, so I won't get into it right now because I'm out of time.
Thank you. Steve, same question to you about housing and how many houses would need to be built. If you want to expand that to talk about Measure C and the issue about housing affordability in Ventura County.
Thank you. We have, and one of the few places where there is similarity between CNF, we have written in there that when we must rezone land to meet state requirements in terms of affordable housing, Measure C allows that exemption. But if you ask the overall question, how many people want to move to coastal Southern California, and how much housing would you have to build to lower the price? All you have to do is look at Orange County, which at one time used to have the same population as Ventura County, and now is much larger than Ventura County. They've lost all of their agricultural land, nearly all of their open space, and what they have is higher housing prices than Ventura County. So it's not an issue of whether you're going to lose your farmland and open space. It's when are you going to get creative and actually build affordable housing rather than housing that makes more money for the developer but doesn't leave our community with the affordable housing stock that we really need. So this is an allegation that's constantly made about SOAR, and actually should be made about anybody that's asking for people to have a right to vote. And it's one that the citizens of Ventura County have clearly weighed in and addressed, and that is they want to be convinced that it's a good project. Thank you.
Thank you. To sustain VC, your point of view as far as number of houses that should be built to lower the price, and what can we do about having more affordable housing?
I'll take that. As I said at the outset, we took many of the provisions of Measure C and adopted them as part of our Measure F. We just made it better. The fact of the matter is that he doesn't address the issue of farm labor housing. It's kind of a testy issue in the county, but I can tell you from the agricultural standpoint, and I dealt with federal officials from the Department of Justice about this issue in a lawsuit we filed against them in February this year, that the H-2A, the guest worker program that is coming into the United States, there's a paradigm shift to California and to the West Coast. The issue of farm labor housing is going to be a much more significant issue, and yet they don't address it, but we do. We do because it's a viability issue for the farming industry to stay alive. We do not have enough labor in this county, apart from water and other issues that are making agricultural employers, farmers, competitive. And this housing component is an important element of Measure F.
Anything to add, Lynn?
I just want to say that the SOAR ordinance expresses a preference to keep farm worker housing in the city, and that preference is 3 times as expensive to build it in the city as in the county. And ours really doesn't express that preference. We want it all of the above. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe, Steve, you're up first on this next one. We're going to talk about food processing. How does acreage from Measure C and F each set aside for farmers to use for so-called food processing of their crops? What restrictions do each impose, if any, for such activity?
Classic example of the difference between Measure C and F is in the food hub reference that we have in there. There are about 200 acres have been analyzed as the possible food production capacity here in Ventura County. And this is by some experts that came in from Sacramento. We spoke with those people quite a bit as we were writing the SOAR initiative. And what those experts identified was, although there's 200 acres of food processing that could take place, most of that food processing is already allowed in the agricultural areas. And there's just a few things that you can't do in the agricultural agricultural areas like cooking and bottling. And we spoke with those experts, and they were very comfortable when we said, you know, if you're at about 12 acres, that would be the amount of the 200 acres that needs to have special zoning to be able to allow 200 acres of food processing. You only need to have about 12 acres for cooking, bottling, et cetera. Now, by doing that, that's a classic example of us trying to be cautious and limit how much agricultural land are you allowing the politicians to rezone without checking in with the people. Meanwhile, Measure C went just the opposite. They said, let the Board of Supervisors do a whole 225, don't check with the people at all, and who knows what you'll get with that. Thank you.
Thank you. To sustain VC, how much acreage does CNF each set aside for farmers to use for food processing? What restrictions do you impose, if any?
So we allow 225 acres for processing. This is very important to the farmers. And what Supervisor Bennett said is really not true. The zoning ordinance does not allow any additives to be added that would make it processing, and it would not be allowed in agricultural lands. And that precludes lemonade and guacamole, and that's where we want to go in this county. We'd like to have our own private labels for Ventura County for lemonade and guacamole. The other thing they didn't consult is their own food hub group that's here, which includes Phil McGrath, who is one of our proponents. He is one of the major leaders in the food hub group. They didn't talk to him before they put their 3-acre parcels. In processing, you couldn't even park trucks on a 3-acre parcel, so there won't be any processing, any additional processing under SOAR. Actually, our study, our initiative, took into account Bruce Stensley with the Economic Development Cooperative, and their numbers were 223 acres, which would produce $1.3 billion total expansion of the Ventura County economy and create 2,640 jobs. And that's what we're looking for, is jobs in this community. And it's very important. Consumers these days want ready-to-eat produce that is cut, washed, juiced, blended, mixed, and fermented, and they would like to have it locally. And right now, all of our produce is being trucked out of the county. There's tons of trucks, you see them all the time, for processing in Salinas and the Central Valley. And we'd like to keep those trucks here, and we'd like to be able to process our own produce here. Thank you.
Thank you. Jared, do you want to add anything?
Well, first, I would also like some lemonade and guacamole, but on a more restricted time frame than Measure F is talking about. I'm a little peckish. And secondly, I take a fairly laissez-faire attitude to this. Either it is economically efficient for farmers to convert some of their land into processing facilities, which will raise the value of the other land in agriculture and also raise their profits, or it is not. And that will either have spillover effects on the community, which will be ameliorated depending on who has the property rights and who has to pay whom, or they won't. But going back for a second to something that Mr. Bennett said, he was saying that we need to move away from the developers' profitable housing of these large single-family McMansions and towards affordable housing. Remember, it's far more profitable to build yourself an 8 or 10-story building and sell off 25 or 30 condos than it is to build a couple houses on the same land. The reason they don't do that is because there are additional restrictions other than SOAR that keep that from happening. Just removing those and keeping SOAR would still be really great. It would be a good thing. Removing SOAR and keeping those would also be great to me. I think that for many of you, the first option would be really nice. I just don't think you're going to adopt it, which is why I'm here tonight to say no to everything. Thank you.
We only have time for about 2 more questions, but there's a lot here, and I apologize in advance. I'm not going to be able to get all the questions in, but I'll try to get some of the controversial ones in. To the Sustain VC people, it says that Measure F allows development near schools without a vote of the people. And it also says, why does Measure F's brochure say no urban development can occur without a vote of the people when it does seem to allow development? So this has been talked about before. And I'll give you a chance to answer this question about development near schools and without a vote.
Thank you. I want to be very clear about this. The exemptions for urban development around schools, those parcels, are actually provided in the Oxnard and Ventura city SOAR measures. The Oxnard City SOAR measure allows 160 acres a year to be added to the curb if the land is deemed unusable for agriculture. And that's what Measure F is all about. Let's not have our farmland be unusable for agriculture. If it gets there, then Measure F has a provision to allow that land to be in a rural county use, because you can't develop urban land in the county next to a city. Based on the guidelines for orderly development, it hasn't been done here for 30 years, and it's not going to happen here. What would happen is that the farmer that's next to a school would go to the city and have it annexed into the city to get the city services that it would need, the water and sewer, and they do it through the loopholes, which are actually in the Oxnard and Ventura, and actually 6 city SOARs, including Santa Paula, Fillmore, Camarillo, and Moore Park. And so that's the way this is. And so what we want to do is create a rural buffer, some kind of a use in between the high density and the schools and the farmland, so that that next piece of farmland is buffered, not developed into shopping malls and housing tracts. Thank you.
Jared, anything to add on this one?
Yes, actually, and I hate to disagree with any of my fellow panelists, but right, they're really nice people and all, but that will create something similar to what's happened in London, where they created a green zone immediately around London, combined with the existing restrictions on zoning in London, has made London the most expensive city in Europe, if not in the whole world. The bottom line is the land just outside of the urban growth boundary, on the other side of the line, according to an economist at CLU, has been reduced in value by about $400,000 relative to land just inside. Let me put that differently. The artificial scarcity created inside the city has dramatically driven up the costs inside the city. The only reason that land just outside the city isn't being used more efficiently is because of measures like SOAR, and mostly as the way Sustained VC would keep it. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, same question to you about Measure F, about
Thank
development.
you. I appreciate the question. What Lynn Jensen just said to you, I believe, is a part of the Measure F attempt to intentionally deceive people about one of the loopholes. And it's because they know that if people know the truth about that loophole that's being referred to, the school loophole, they'll realize that Measure F is not what it is purported to be. You saw the language. There was no language in there in that section that said they had to redesignate to rural land. It didn't say that at all. They could have said that. They should have said that if that's what they were going to do, but that's not what it said. And yet that's what she continues to say, even though it's been pointed out over and over again. Now, I would call that intentional deception, but they have enough money, because there is so much money that's going to be made on just that one loophole. They have enough money to be able to confuse the voters of Ventura County, and they may get away with it. The second thing is, she said, oh, it should be the cities, and that kind of gets everybody all confused again. The cities should be doing this. I asked this question. If they wanted the cities to be the ones doing this exception, why did they write in the opportunity for the Board of Supervisors to do it? If they want the cities to do it, let the Oxnard SOAR do that if that's in fact what it says. But they didn't. They wrote it in because they knew it was a loophole that would be very attractive. Follow the money, and you'll see that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start this next question with Jared, and it's really about profiting from converting land to development. You've talked about that. The questions are about if the people funding Measure F are the ones who would actually be profiting from conversion of that. So, Jared, I guess for you as an economist, do you want to talk about converting farmland to development?
Could you turn that into a question for me, David? I heard a lot of statements, but at no point did I hear anything where I would have told the interrogative was appropriate to a student writing that to me.
So I'll be getting an F in your class, I guess? Okay.
Mr. Marin.
Jared, as far as the way that the farmland gets converted to development, is that an appropriate thing for Ventura County, and having the people who would convert and make money from that give up the agriculture?
So if what we're asking, and David, I'm going to try to rephrase the question too. If what we're asking is, are there people who would make a big pile of money if they were allowed to turn their farmland into something other than farmland? The answer is obviously. Let me emphasize this. The farmland is worth dramatically more as not farmland than it is as farmland, okay? This is just a fact. Now, here's the thing. That market value does not incorporate the non-pecuniary benefits that fall on other people, and it also doesn't include the pecuniary benefits that fall on other people. It's totally true. Only here's the thing. You didn't try to buy that land from them. You took the land from them by voting. Okay? That's what happened. So, yeah, a lot of people would make money. Here's the other people who would make money as the density of the county would rise. Everybody. I know we love to villainize Orange County around here. Let me make this clear. Orange County isn't just 3 million people. It's also dramatically wealthier than Ventura County on a per capita basis. And that's because agglomerations of people are more productive. Period. End of story. Okay? So yeah, there would be people who make money. The last time I checked in the United States, that was still okay. Perhaps I am mistaken. If I am, please don't tell me because I think I might die. My entire discipline is kind of predicated on the idea that making money is okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So Steve, I'll try to put this for Measure C. Measure C does restrict development. It restricts converting land to development, and it also restricts that for several generations. Why is that appropriate?
Well, I was prepared to answer the question that you just asked about
Okay, if you
the
can
cost.
remember
So
what I asked,
they're
Jerry.
both.
Wait, Steve, you knew it was a question?
They're both together. 100 acres, and this is a study that just came out 2 weeks ago. 100 acres of farmland in Ventura County rezoned for development will go up in value by $25 million. That's just 100 acres. Imagine a situation where somebody owns 1,000 and 10,000 acres, et cetera. That is going to create an enormous amount of pressure for development. And that's why when you write a measure like this that is so important to the citizens of Ventura County, you want to be really careful and put limits on the loopholes, because that kind of money will drive enormous amounts of money to go into boards of supervisors races. That kind of money will hire high-priced lawyers that will work every loophole they possibly can. And that is why I would offer to you Measure F at every opportunity. Explicitly avoided the opportunity to bring clarity to their loophole, to put limits on their loophole. They could so easily, with the school loophole, have said this is for only X distance from the school. They could have so easily done that, or it's only could be for rural. They put none of that in there intentionally. Thank you.
To the sustained VC?
I think I'm in medieval England, and he's arguing on behalf of the proletariat against people who own land. I almost feel as though Mr. Bennett hates people with land. There's this obfuscation within their campaign that anybody that has land and is a farmer is a developer in farmer's clothing. And I think that misses the entire argument here, is that farmers want to remain in farming. This county has had the guidelines for orderly development in place since the 1980s. It had the most restrictive land use policies in place anywhere in Southern California. The reason why there has been no development in this county had nothing to do with SOAR. It has everything to do with our economy. People weren't growing houses. So the point here is that let's just look at the bigger picture here for the farmers, okay? Let's understand that farmers want to stay in farming. It's not about development. That is a scare tactic by the SOAR folks that got them all elected in 1998. And it's not representative of what this industry is going to be in 20 years or 34 years from now. We have to get land use policies in effect that are consistent with general planned amendments of 20 years, and then reevaluate where we are as a county.
Thank you. I guess we should have planned this to go 2 hours instead of 1 hour. Unfortunately, this is our time. We'll have to stop here. I do thank all of the panelists for being here. We're now going to begin our closing statements. We'll reverse the order. And panelists, you have 1.5 minutes for your closing statements. We'll begin with Jared Barton.
I'd like to thank you all for your time and laughter. It's very encouraging. I want to point out something that Steve just said a moment ago. He said that if we rezoned 100 acres of farmland, it would be worth $25 million. Let me translate that to you. That farmland is more valuable as not farmland than as farmland. That is a giant price signal in my line of work. What that means is that there are people out in the world who would be happy to live here who cannot live here because you will not build the housing or you will not let other people build the housing to let them come. What you are doing is driving up the price of housing for the poorest people in your community and preventing people who would be perfectly happy to be your neighbors from being your neighbors. What I'm wondering is, I know Steve moved here in 1972, 73 after he got out of Brown. I moved here in 2012. There were about 375,000 people who lived here back then. There's about 850,000 now. I imagine, right, based on comments that I've read in the VC Star over the last 20 years, that he pointed out, we would have adopted these things earlier in other places. I'm just wondering, am I not supposed to be here? And if I'm not, who else isn't? That's what I want to know. Because that's essentially what you're saying when you vote for SOAR, or to a lesser extent, but still, for Sustain VC. Thank you very much. God bless and have a good evening.
Hold the applause, please. And we'll
Oh, no,
now go
please
to
don't.
Sustain VC. Minute and a half.
I would just like everyone to come away tonight thinking that Sustain VC, Measure F, is created by farmers. It's all about farmers. They have one of my clients that paid him $150. They have another farmer that's a developer. They don't have anybody on their board of directors that's a farmer. And anyone that was used to be a farmer that supported them in 1998 is no longer associated with them. We're all about farming. We're not developers in farming clothing, folks. We want to stay here. I've been in this industry for 40 years because I love this industry. I want to see it happen. I moved here in 1977. I love this county. I love the viewscape. But the viewscape comes at a cost, okay? Because those farmers out there are getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock every morning, and they're fighting international competition, and they're fighting to keep pesticides that they need for their crops, and they need water, and they need labor, and we don't need a board of supervisors or restrictive land use mechanisms that don't make it viable to continue on. Because ultimately, if those farmers go out of business, I will tell you that that land will be developed, even under